if we believe that and truly believe it, you start looking at everything that happens is for us. And it's not happening to us. That's a victim mentality, but it's happening for us. But that is my own time that I have come to realize that. And I feel the journey will continue to the day I die, because it's always excavating more. It's excavating more of digging deeper into where'd this come from?
Constantly becoming something. Yeah.
Yeah, it's constantly evolving and being curious about it. And also we really need to think twice about this illusion of everything's supposed to be perfect or not, like this. If you think about life is like a heartbeat. And when I say this, it's up, down, right? This is
It's
what
true.
think about it. And then, and people want it to be I want it to always feel good. No, if it does, that's flat. And guess what that means? You're dead, figuratively and in life. And so I think if we can really try to reshape our thoughts, and it doesn't happen overnight. I had to go back and do a lot of this and of my own looking and being curious.
Hello, everyone. Today's episode, we're exploring how personal rupture can become a grounding force, how clarity emerges when trust systems fail, and how one person can rise with responsible leadership without permission, credentials, or institutional power. Today, I have my friend and the amazing leader, Kim Witczak. She's a nationally recognized drug safety advocate. She's a disruptor, and she's a 3-term consumer representative on the FDA's Psychiatric Drugs Advisory Committee. After the sudden death of her husband, Woody, from an undisclosed antidepressant side effect, Kim turned personal devastation into public accountability. She helped secure the FDA's black box suicide warning and exposed systematic failures in drug safety. With no medical degree or institutional backing, she has shown how one clear, persistent voice can challenge powerful systems and insist on truth, transparency, and responsibility. Kim, that is a mouthful, but I am so glad you're here.
I'm so excited to have this conversation. Thanks for having me.
You have done such amazing work, and I know a little bit of it. So let's start from the beginning, because I'm sure everybody who's tuning in now doesn't. So for listeners who may not know your story, can you just briefly share a brief version of what led you into the work you're doing now?
Sure. Well, I like to call myself the accidental advocate. And the reason I say the accidental advocate is because sometimes our greatest purposes it would choose us, and it's not necessarily what I would have chose. So 22 years ago, my life looked very different. I was kind of, I was living the life that I had dreamed and planned of. I was happily married. I had for almost 10 years to my husband, my best friend, Woody. And we were just starting to talk about having a family, and we both had successful careers. I was in advertising and Wood was in sales. He had just started his dream job with a startup company. And however, on August 6, 2003, literally with one phone call, that entire life came crashing down. My dad, I was out of town on business, and my dad called to tell me that my husband was found dead, hanging from the rafters of in our garage. And in 1 second, my entire life blew up. And even when I say those words today, all these years later, I still cannot believe that actually happened to me, because I see myself now very differently, and it's been a long journey. But it really started when, and I should really back up and tell people that Woody had no history of depression. He had no history of any other mental health issues. He had just gone to his doctor because I had mentioned that he had started his dream job and he was having trouble sleeping. And he went to his doctor, who he trusted, and I always called him Humpty Dumpty. He was an athlete. So doctors always fixed him. They fixed his stitches, and, he almost died when he was a kid because of penicillin and when his appendix burst. And so he always trusted him. And he went to the doctor and was saying that he was having trouble sleeping. And Wood was a guy that needed 8 hours of sleep. And the doctor gave him a 3-week sample pack of antidepressant Zoloft and told him it would help take the edge off and help him sleep. I happened the day that Woody got that prescription, I was on a big BMW production down in New Zealand for the first 3 weeks he was on the drug. So I wasn't even home when he got put on this drug. And so I'm having the time of my life. I'm not there watching what's happening to Woody. But I remember coming home shortly before his death, and I was super excited to see him. I was going to make him dinner, and I'll never forget something that ultimately what was actually a gift now, but he walked in our back door completely drenched through his dress shirt. He was bawling, fell to the floor in our kitchen with his hands around his head like a vice. And he's like, Kim, you got to help me. I don't know what's happening. My heart's outside my body. And he's rocking back and forth. And I'm looking at him like, what? Like, I've never seen this before, right? So we calmed him down. We did praying, we did yoga breathing, called the doctor, and the doctor said, you got to give the drug 4 to 6 weeks to kick in.
Oh, you got to do it for 4 more weeks.
Yeah. And so every day the next week of Wood's life, he would come home and he'd be like, what do you think about acupuncture? I would beat this feeling in my head. Well, I had no idea when I left to go out of town a week later that would literally be the last time I would ever see him. And it was on August 6th. I was at the studio. It was my busy time. And both of us traveled all the time. So like travel was nothing unusual in our relationship. But when I finally called my dad, so it was my dad that I'm like, hey, I haven't heard from Woody all day. And I'm like afraid he might have hit his head. Like I'm like literally, in the middle of still shooting in the studio with all my coworkers. And that's when my dad called me. And it's like, it's bad. It's bad. He's dead. And literally, so anyways, that's, I know it's a pretty intense story. Again, it's why I say the accidental advocate, because I would never have chosen to do this. But, it's funny, that night that Woody was found, obviously my life fell apart, but seeds were being planted. And I realized literally seeds have been planted my whole life. But, that night, the coroner called and asked one simple question. Was Woody on any medication? And literally the only medication he was taking was Zoloft. And she said, we're going to take it with us. It might have something to do with his death.
So until that point, you really, those headaches and all of the other things that were going on, there was no connection really.
Wow. No. I had no idea. We had no history in mental health drugs, like mental health. Like he had just started his dream job. Like nothing made sense. So like everything in my body, when my dad told me he was dead, and I was like, well, what do you mean dead? I'm like, how do you know? And he's like, he's hanging. I'm like, what? Like I couldn't even wrap my head around like that is ultimately the way that Woody died. And so literally that question, and then also the front page of our newspaper that day, I should say, because Woody was found at night, had an article that said the UK finds link between antidepressants and suicide in teens. Literally that same day. And so I was like, I had all these like signs right there. But yet my entire life, fell apart. And, my brother-in-law, who became kind of he became my partner, my sister's husband in doing all my work out in DC initially, he went home that night because nothing made sense to him either. Like nothing made sense to any of our family. But Googled Zoloft and suicide and had no idea that the FDA had hearings in 1991. This was now 13 years before Woody died, on the emergence of violence and suicide with Prozac. And fast forward now, and at that time, all the FDA advisors said, nope, we don't see anything. And they all took monies from companies that made antidepressant products. Right. But now we have Zoloft on the market, Paxil on the market, and being used for kids. all before Woody. This is all during the time leading up to Woody's death. So really that became kind of the mission of like, you know, trying to figure out what happened. And then you start putting it all together, and here we are, and I'm still doing this work all these years later.
I can't even imagine. And I know it's been years, but I imagine that pain still sits very raw in you. And I just say thank you for being here and for sharing this story. I'm so sorry that it happened to you, and I'm glad to hear that you had people that were rooting behind you at that moment in your life. Was there a time in all of this that the truth just you could no longer ignore, and you knew that this was the moment that you could either be consumed by it or you could make that change? Can you tell me, was there a moment in that?
Yeah, I mean, I think really from the beginning, the seed of like trust, the intuition of this doesn't make sense. That was kind of the start of something, right? But, I don't think I've ever felt a heartache like that. And I remember after Woody's death, or his funeral, I was sitting down in our basement with all these life-size posters of Woody that my ad agency had made. And I'm sitting there and I'm literally trying to claw my heart out. Like I just was like, and so for anybody who's had grief, all that, it's real. Like I didn't know the heart could hold this kind of pain. And I was literally just trying to claw it out, right? And I was praying a prayer. God, take my pain and use it. It does me no good. Now, again, I didn't know what that prayer meant either. That was I was just like, take this and use it. And I realized, wow, there's something about this idea of surrender. But I think the real thing is as my brother-in-law is putting stuff together, he's praying a prayer of like, what do I do with all this information? And everybody around him was like, you can't take Kim down, taking on like the FDA, like, and here I'm just trying to figure out what just happened. But when we were throwing out, so Wood always said when I met him, he goes, don't put me in the ground, like throw my ashes out in the middle of Lake Michigan. So we're literally 6 weeks after Woody died. We now are finally going to Chicago to release Woody's ashes in the middle of Lake Michigan. And literally, everybody's on the boat and I'm holding this box of Woody's ashes and my brother-in-law is coming up next to me. And he's like, I can't believe this is what happens to us when we're gone. Right. Then out of nowhere, literally in the middle of the lake, there is this, we both looked down and only the two of us saw it. And also we see this like book floating by, like a red book like this. And I looked at him, I go, does that say what I think it does? And he goes, yeah. And it said in gold letters, the Holy Bible. And in that minute, it floated by and it was Eric who saw it and me that saw it. And for him, it was confirmation of all the prayers, like we're supposed to do this. And for me, it was like Woody and God were like, trust me, this is going to be a big mission, but I need you to trust and I'll be with you. And don't worry about me. Like I've got Woody, he's up here. And so really, I think that was the point where I think I had to surrender and trust because this isn't the person I would have ever been before this.
There's purpose in this pain. I hate that saying, but so many times and in so many of these stories that I keep hearing of resilience, and even in my own stories, it doesn't make sense. And it's painful. We lose. We're grasping just to understand. And really, at the end of the day, there is something in it that's giving us purpose, whether it be to drive us forward. For me, a lot of it was healing. For you, it's to help heal others. What would you say now about the systems that we're taught to trust? I mean, I know even with my own, medical people, a lot of my own healing, as much as they're great and they advocate and do all those things for me, and they'll throw medicines. This is what everybody's using, to help with your chronic illness. But in reality, we're supposed to trust these systems and these people and these medicines that they're just throwing at us. We have to do our own advocacy, obviously. What would you say about that?
Well, it's funny. I don't think I ever thought about it before Woody died, right? I just was blindly trusted. I blindly trusted the system. I trusted that of course, our doctor, like, never once questioned the drug at the time because, it was given to him by his doctor. It was FDA approved and sold as safe and effective. And so I never really thought twice of it. I don't think Woody did either. And so I think, when I think we are by design in a way, we automatically give away our power to a system outside of us. Yeah. And I think the same thing is our doctors also trust the system. They trust that the FDA has done their work. But as I started going through and researching all of this and I call the work that we did kind of the battle for Woody because it was kind of multi-pronged. It was like sharing Woody's story in the media so that, others could learn from it because the media loved Woody's story because he had no history. So he was healthy and then 5 weeks later hung himself. And so I think there was power in that. I also had a wrongful death failure to warn lawsuit from against Pfizer. And in that lawsuit, we got out, like I had one of the best law firms that were working on these issues back in the day. And they had already, most people don't realize that Phil Hartman, who was a comedian on Saturday Night Live, his wife murdered him and then killed herself. That was all. She had just started Zoloft. And the law firm, my law firm actually represented them. And so nobody knew any of this stuff, right? But once you started looking, and I remember I said earlier that head outside the body, that was one of the documents that came out from under the seal that immediately they're like, Pfizer had an FDA, or Pfizer had the FDA equivalent in South Africa write to them saying that there were patients on doctors were reporting patients on 50 milligrams, same dose that Woody was on, that they were standing outside their bodies looking in. And Pfizer writes back, "Oh, it happens on all SSRIs. We don't know why." And it was just so that was
normalcy.
Yeah, just but I'm like, wait a minute, but you didn't tell doctors. And then there was a side effect called akathisia, which that same chief medical officer wrote in a medical journal talking about if a patient gets akathisia, quote unquote, death can be a welcome result. Well, that article was published. Anybody can get that. But what wasn't was the letter, a memo to the sales staff that said the attached journal article is not suitable for general practitioners, but may be of interest to neurobiologically inclined psychiatrists. Well, the bulk of their sales comes from GPs. So they intentionally kept that side effect away from GPs. So I started seeing this behavior of, what's being told to us and what is really behind, and the power of why you need litigation, right? But then also doing all the work I did out in DC, and now then sitting on the FDA advisory committee. Most people think clinical trials, that the FDA does clinical trials. They don't do clinical trials. The drug companies they control all aspects of the clinical trial process from start to finish to get the product on the market. And, I think that was the beauty. I always look back when Woody would say to me, "Kim, you could do so much more than advertising. Like, you're made for so much more." But I also believe that my advertising background is what actually helped me to untangle and start connecting all the dots, that healthcare is a big business, and marketing, and we're one of only 2 countries that allow drug ads. So it's a pretty big, powerful system.
There's so much purpose I've noticed in this story for you. And I think that's the part that amazes me is when you first told me the story, just how it seemed to almost fit, just not that anything is perfect when we lose somebody we love, but how there was purpose knowing that you were a fighter, you would handle this. But was there a point for you personally? I mean, I imagine you had to at some point sit down and grieve Woody's loss and all of this. It turned from loss to the anger, I'm assuming, and you can correct me in any of this because this is your story. But was there a point when you just knew you couldn't go back? Like, this is it. I can't stay in this moment anymore. And this can no longer deserve the trust that it had before. It's now about them. It's now about what do I do to heal myself and heal everybody else that are going to go through this as well.
Yeah, I think, I think my advocacy really, and I think anybody who's gone through, when you find purpose, they call it the 6th stage of grief because it helps to make meaning of all the stages. And I don't think grief is linear. It doesn't happen this stage. I mean, literally, I can go all these years back. I mean, it's part of me now, right? It's not who I am. It's a part of me. And so I think for me, really, when I think about when it first happened, I went to the doctor. My doctor said, "Do you think you want something? Do you think you need something?" And she was trying to give me an antidepressant. And I remember, which is ironic, right?
I was just about to say that. Yeah.
The irony of it. But I said to her, I looked at her and go, "Well, I think this is what killed him." And she looked at me like I was like crazy because there were no warnings then, right? But I said, "But aren't I supposed to hurt? Like my husband died. Like, aren't I supposed to hurt?" And she literally said to me, "No, but you don't need to." And I was like, wow. And so I started seeing the system that really would rather like numb you and medicate you and keep us in that, because that pain's no fun. But I have now, like when I started to, and trust me, everybody, like I didn't even know who this person was. When I look at the girl that went out to DC, I'm like, who is this person? I was never this one. Like Woody would want me to get involved in signing. They were going to put 2 cell phone towers in our neighborhood, and Woody was like, "Hey, let's go get everybody in the neighborhood to sign a petition, and we'll go down to city council." And I looked at him, I'm like, "What? You'll never win. You're fighting city council. Like, I'd rather." And then I remember like, "Have fun." And he had looked at me and goes, "I'd rather try like hell and lose than do nothing at all." So I almost in some ways feel like he passed this baton spiritually as he left the world.
Yeah.
And but then I look at myself and I'm like, who is this person when I was out there? And then I would come home and I'm like, people always thought like, "Kim, you're so strong." I'm like, yeah, you don't see the person I am when I come home. You don't see the person who fell apart. You don't see the person. And then I started actually through this process, I realized that I was almost on 2 paths. Like I was doing this thing for, it was too late for our family, but if it could help somebody, it also gave me a connection to Woody that I was able to talk about him, keep him alive. And he always said he wanted his life and to make a difference and he would never judge it by how much money. So I feel like I was helping with that purpose, and we didn't have kids, and I think it would have looked very different if we did have kids. It's funny how God knows what he needs. But when I look at then on the parallel path was my own journey, which I realized that there was a lot of healing that had to be done. Woody was my point of entry into healing. But I was like, whoa. And I also started looking at my childhood and how I grew up, didn't think that I was able to keep my voice or like always put this front out, that I was able to hold my stuff together, because I didn't fall apart when I'd be out in DC, and all these other families that were telling their stories would be like screaming and, "You killed our kid." And I'm like super like this.
And, I think that's the part, I'm sitting here listening to the story and I keep saying, yes, because really when we root in our stories is how we realign and rise through them. It's not by numbing. It's not by moving and sitting in the past forever. We'll never move through that. And it's not about looking at the future, because the future isn't going to answer and heal us. It's right in the now where we're at. What amazes me, though, in all of this is the responsible leader that you are, that you took on with the stakes being as high as they were to make the systems change and all of that. But what amazes me is that you continued to not just stay hardened in that, but you also didn't lose your own humanity in it. And I think that's the part that a lot of people do. And I think that's why I love hearing your story so much, because you went through the grieving through it with him, and looking what you're doing. It just, you yourself as a leader amaze me. But I guess, is there something that kept you better in that balance to move through, not just, you know, being hateful and seeking revenge, and probably in a lot of different areas, life, the pharmaceutical companies, the doctors themselves. But how did you stay rooted in yourself in order to heal yourself through that too?
Yeah, it's funny. I start, looking back. I mean, I think number one is acceptance, right? Accept what is. And I remember and not fighting with what used to exist. I think when things change, or, whether it's a divorce or your health, or you lose your job, there's that initial stage of well, that shouldn't have happened. And you're trying to no, I want my old past. But the reality is it doesn't exist. It literally doesn't exist. I can't go back. I can't even go back to what I did earlier and do my gym workout and wish I would have lifted heavier. I can't even go back. The only thing I can do is go forward. And yet I think there's something powerful in recognizing what is and accepting what is. And then from there, I think that was kind of the first. But then I really look back, and faith was a huge part of my life. I don't know that yes, I grew up in a household. My mom was huge into her faith, and every Christmas she would give us a devotion, and Woody and I would always just kind of laugh at it. And I went to church camp, and I loved it. But I don't know that I ever understood what it meant to be grounded in something. I always just felt like it was religion as opposed to this deep centered core. And
How
I think
it applies. Yeah.
yeah. And I think when that Bible floated, I started going, wow, I started really understanding wait, God, it's you and me. It isn't out there. It's here. I have to find it here. And so I think my faith was a huge part of it. I think intuition, right? I think we've all have this nudging, or when you're whether you're a mom and something doesn't look right with your kid, there's intuitive abilities that we all come into this world and we need to learn how to tap into. And I think intuitively, Woody's death made no sense. But I also go back when I was a kid. I remember there was a lot of times when something just intuitively didn't, and these little voice, that's that small, still voice that talks to us, and not the mean one. It's the one that's connected and rooted and grounded. That voice is that small, still voice that says you're enough, and is your cheerleader. And so I think the intuition was really learning to tap into that. And then I think there's something about, I could be really angry, but that doesn't really serve me. And it also didn't serve the relationship I had with Woody. Woody loved life. And so I'm oh, he would be so sad if I let this destroy me. Yeah. And so I think that meant, guess what? You got to get up. You got to move. You got to do something. And even we used to be big runners. And in those early days, I'm I can't run. And then I was something in me was you got to go out. And yeah, I couldn't run, but I took steps. And then it eventually became a little bit longer. And I was I just got myself doing again versus just sitting and ruminating. And so I think resilience is part of it. Then I think I also started realizing how powerful our bodies and the emotions. So a lot of my healing is I didn't go the traditional medical way, but I was doing I'd never heard of Rolfing, which is this body work which was when they, I always used to think body work was something of a luxury, you do it at the, when you went on a vacation. But one of my friends at a place that I worked, he said he was doing something called rolfing. And I was like, oh, what's that? And he's like, oh, it's the Maya fascia, which is all the fascia system. It's 10 sessions and it's everything that holds your body together. But that when they got to session 6, and this was really, which is your diaphragm area, I remember telling the I've told my practitioner, Karen, I'm like, I have a hard time like breathing. It's like it comes in and then it skips and then I'm really shallow. So she's working in my diaphragm and she goes, I started crying like for literally 2 hours. I just laid on a table. It was gut wrenching.
You in pain or okay?
No, it was just like emotional. I think it was this release. And I realized, wow, so much of my whole life, I've held this in my life, like in my body, like holding my voice back. That's why I always had sore throat. Like I always get this thing in my throat and my diaphragm. And it was really that body work that I saw that, oh my gosh, there's so much that lives in our body that, you've always heard like body keeps the score. But when you start really like looking at it and learning to breathe, and after we did that work, I could also now breathe my body, and we're made with a bunch of energy and systems as people. And so that really like opened this. And even to this day, because you don't ever, I think a lot of those childhood, experiences still live in us and their stories. So that when I start getting like nervous, I know that I have to go and massage and pull apart my diaphragm or start doing really deep breathing there and here, and I will start crying. But it's not a sad cry. It's my body needs to release. And that's what I started realizing.
I feel like we could talk about this forever because I know that, in the back of my brain, I'm thinking about all of the listeners who may or may not be able to relate with the story, but they're grieving something themselves. And many are intuitive. They listen to their body. And then there's those that don't. What was that called again that you said that they could look up possibly? Because if we're not going to be able to heal through our medical system, what other ways would you suggest that they could go through? Because one of the questions I wanted to ask you is do you feel like you're healed now? And how did you get there? Because I think that's what everyone's always looking for is, we talk about rooting and realigning and there's all these tips and tricks that we can give them, but how did they actually do it? How did they rise? And I think that's what everybody tunes in to hear is they want to know how to do it. So how did you do it?
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, that's called rolfing, but but there's a lot of like out in San Francisco, there's an amazing healer called the Soul Whisper. And he like is in therapy, I went to therapy, but the thing is therapy would bring up things, but but it shows up in your body where the Soul Whisper, like learning how talk and body, integrates together.
Yeah.
Was able to like massage it out, like, and all of a sudden it moves. He'd be like, it'd be in your shoulder, or like you start being really curious about the idea of body and like emotions that live in your body. So like that was one thing for me that was super interesting. I was also putting myself into places like where I really started analyzing like where did these stories come from, and I think that was the beauty of. I will say that is the beauty of when you go through some kind of grief or trauma. Get curious about it. Like, get curious about and not go. I mean, sure, you have to go through the process and blame and, whatever your process is, just trying to make sense of it. But I think that idea of getting curious, and then I start looking at like all the stories that I'm like, these are all. I did go to something called Landmark. I've invested a lot in personal development and super curious. And then I learned a lot about, all the thoughts that we have, like I call them roommates in our head. They're like saying to you and you're like, and then you have to go over here and you're like, thanks. I got it. I got it now.
That imposter.
Like you have to like learn to like talk to yourself, but also not be afraid of feeling the sadness, feeling it, but not staying there, and get curious about it and then go back and go, I used to always say, I was a kid that and it turns out I didn't have like any trauma childhood, but my parents both were ones that, like, my dad grew up on a farm, and his parents lost their kid before my dad was born. So my dad was raised where it was, and my grandma never talked about losing their son at 5 years old ever. And I realized there's this idea of cows still got to be milked in the morning, meaning, you got to still get up, like, can't let it, like, and so I think I grew up that way. My mom's mom died when she was young. My mom just, you know, went forward. And so I learned that, I learned to keep everything inside. And I think that was what I started to realize, like, oh, wait, these were my stories. Like my mom and dad, I go, wait, no, your mom and dad, Kim, didn't do anything. They did the best they could. And so it's like getting curious about every aspect of your life. And I think, that has really helped me. And then to your question of, like, am I healed? I I don't know that you're ever truly, like, I remember one person, once way back, because, she knew I love to go all of these self-development things. And, if you look at my shelves, I've got, like, Wayne Dyer. I've got so many people. I like, from my Christian things to my woo-woo people. And I'm just curious about the soul, because I do believe that we're spiritual beings having a physical experience. And that means that if we believe that and truly believe it, you start looking at everything that happens is for us. And it's not happening to us. That's a victim mentality, but it's happening for us. Like, not you. Yeah. If somebody said that right away to me, I'd be like, yeah, whatever. But that is my own time that I have come to realize that. And, and I feel that the journey will continue to the day I die, because it's always excavating more. It's excavating more of, like, digging deeper into, where'd this come from? Like,
Constantly becoming something. Yeah.
yeah, it's constantly evolving and being curious about it. And, and also, like, we really need to think twice about this illusion of everything's supposed to be perfect, or, like, not, like this. If you think about life is like a heartbeat. And when I say this, it's up, down, like, right? Like, this is what,
true.
think about it. And then, and people want it to be like, I want it to always feel good. No, if it does, that's flat. And guess what that means? You're dead, in figuratively and in life. And so I think if we can, really try to reshape our thoughts, and it doesn't happen overnight. I had to go back and do a lot of this, and of my own looking and being curious. But I feel now, doing things that I never did before. Like, I realized I love dancing, and I love going dancing. I go to EDM concerts, and people are like, Kim, we did that in college. I'm like, yeah, but I didn't.
You're living life.
Yeah, I feel like I am more alive today than I've ever been. And it came through, like, all this that I could now say was a gift.
Yeah.
But I don't think it was a gift that I would have ever chosen. But sometimes, like, I guess that's why I say the accidental advocate. But that really started me on this, like, wow, what do you think? So you're my greatest, I can't believe I'm saying this, but through this, you were my greatest teacher. One of my greatest.
I can relate with that only in my own illness and being so sick and being on the floor and not knowing if I was going to survive. And, I think I hear that story a lot in us when something challenges us in our lives. We look at life a little differently. And I think there's a point where you have to make a decision. How do you live your life, whether it be today, tomorrow, maybe it's even in 10, 20 years. We don't know how long we have. And I think, whether it be living for Woody and living life more fully for you. And for me, it's living every day just so that my children see my resilience and know that there's more out there. And I still choke up every time I say it, but there's purpose in the pain. And if we can just realign and rise through it, so much can change for ourselves and for other people through it. I think that for myself. And I actually think after hearing this, a lot of the listeners are going to see why you are the leader and the amazing person you are. And unfortunate for the circumstance. I think, though, that you have a lot for people to look to in a certain sense of leadership of that nature and to really be motivated and inspired by. I ask this question to everybody as I close, but what is one question or one small action you would invite listeners to take with them in the week ahead that if they could live with it, to have more clarity, to be more responsible in their life with living that life the fullest, and to have a little courage with?
I would say that you like coming to the realization that your voice matters and that one person can make a difference. And it doesn't matter in what it is. It's all going to look different. It's not going to look like me, and it's not looking like your situation. But one person, when you start telling your story and not being afraid of your story and feeling into it, if there's something that you want to go do and change or would like to see, you can do that. And I am like living proof of it. That is like, it starts within and then it becomes like the butterfly effect, you know, and it starts inspiring somebody else that inspires somebody else. And so I think we all have the ability, and it's not just one or a couple of us. It's every one of us, because we were designed as in the likeness of God. We are children, that we were made in his likeness. So why wouldn't we be able to go and think that we're enough, and we are enough?
Gosh, I have chills. You actually I feel giddy. I feel like all of a sudden, coming out of that cocoon when you said balloon, it makes so much sense. And I'm so in awe of you. I'm amazed with your story, what you've done in movement. And I'm so proud to know you and to know the work that you've done and that you could share it here on the show. So thank you. You did mention you have a book coming. I know it's in process. So I want everybody to know who you are now for when that comes out. But where can listeners learn more about your work? Where can they follow you of what you're doing now, or the best place that they can reach to you?
Sure. You can follow me on Instagram, Kim Witczak. I also do a lot of my advocacy. So if you're interested in the healthcare space and like challenging the FDA, the drug companies, I'm always going to be the voice of the public, the unsuspecting public, as I like to call it. And you can follow me at Woody Matters on X. And I also have a Substack, unacceptable or acceptable collateral damage, but it's really unacceptable collateral damage. And I do writing about that as well. But really, I'm super excited for the book. It's a process, as you know, because you completed yours. But it's been 22 years in the making. It's kind of the whole. I weave through the story of all the stuff that I learned out at the FDA, drug companies, but also my own healing. So look for that. It'll definitely be, I guess, for 2026. So it's this year without a doubt. So
I'm so excited. I'm definitely following it, and I cannot wait to share it with other people and maybe have you back on the show to share more about that story. Before we wrap, I just want to remind everybody, you don't have to be whole to lead. Leadership doesn't begin once everything is resolved. It begins when you root in yourself in truth, when you realign with what matters, and you choose to rise with that responsibility right where you are. Thanks for joining us.